No slow lanes, do not lock knowledge in chains, do not take our rights away, to connect, communicate. No slow lanes, do not kill our innovation, do not let money decide our access to information. No slow lanes.
Welcome to Zine Your Research, the podcast series, where we're talking about zines in academia. I am Catherine Hicks, an arts and humanities librarian at Tulane University. Today, I'm talking to Agnes Czeblakow, curator of rare books at Tulane Special Collections, about what exactly makes a zine a zine. So, can you introduce yourself further?
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yes, I am the curator of rare books here at Tulane University Special Collections. I'm also head of the research services, who oversees the Special Collections instruction program, reading room, reference, and outreach and exhibitions.
Wow, that's a lot of jobs.
It is a lot of jobs.
So how do you come to zines? What is your background in books?
What is my background in zines? So as a youth, a younger person, growing up in communist Poland in the 80s, I was a punk rocker. So naturally, no other options to be, I guess. So zines, while I didn't have access to sort of the punk zines that were coming out in the UK and in the US, I did have access to a lot of sort of ephemeral printed materials that were distributed by those communities, as well as sort of, it's hard to say underground newspapers, but definitely sort of youth focus, kind of countercultural, not officially published newspapers that were circulating. So as, 8th, 9th graders, 10th graders, and then high school kids, that was our kind of print culture. I became more interested in zines actually after I started working in libraries and special collections because they were part of collections. And in one of those places, I was actually responsible for collecting them.
Oh.
Actually, I'm responsible for collecting
them now.
Yep. So 2 places where I get to build the zine collections for special collections.
So as a rare book librarian, what is your working professional definition of a zine versus maybe your personal definition of a zine? What is a zine?
So I guess I want to say, because I've heard that many zinesters say that when you ask them for their definition of a zine, they say it's really whatever you want it to be as long as you made it. But I'm not necessarily comfortable with that because I think for me, what needs to happen or what a zine needs to have is kind of a low production value.
Sure.
So it is whatever you want it to be as far as topic or subject matter. But I think it is, maybe I'm a little bit old school, but I want it to be photocopied. I want it to be stapled, perhaps sewn, but that's a lot of work if you're making 50, 60, 100 copies of something. I think it also needs to circulate either through mail or through, picking it up at various venues among the folks who are part of the community or the group that is part of the audience for that particular zine. I think they should also be cheap or relatively inexpensive. And I think these days we have maybe pushed that cost of the zines, but also their production value a little bit higher. There's also inflation, so I think everything's going to be, I think the $1 zines maybe are
a thing of the past. But speaking of which, I think this all comes from the history of a zine. For the uninitiated, can you give a brief history of zines and where we are situated maybe in zines now?
So depending on who you ask, everything maybe begins sometime around the 19th century. There are amateur press associations, APAs. They kind of begin in the early 20th century. And those are just groups of amateur printers who begin to print kind of one-pagers, two-pages, and exchange them among themselves. They send everything to a centralized mailer, I guess. They put it together and then they distribute it to the members. H.P. Lovecraft apparently was a member of one of those amateur press associations. And also the early sci-fi kind of zines and groups emerge out of those APAs. Mm-hmm. So late 19th century, early 20th century, and then in the 1930s and 40s, that's the kind of official birth of the fanzine, which is the long version of zine, or where zines come from, fanzines. And they begin in the 1930s. That's when we see the kind of growth of sci-fi fandom with the publication of Amazing Stories in 1926. Folks start to gravitate, they start to write letters, forming clubs, and then kind of start publishing their own little fanzine in response to the sci-fi magazines and stories that they are reading. So network of fans expand, and they use the zine as a way to communicate with each other, interact with each other, form a community. So I think connected to that as well is the technology that exists at that time. So the print runs are small because they don't have the Xerox machine just yet. They're using spirit duplicators, mimeographs, which limits their output. 60s and 70s, we see the zine maybe being in conversation with the underground newspapers that start emerging, so countercultural newspapers that emerge that start dealing explicitly with political activism and social critiques. Those are mostly offset printed, which allows them to be published in larger numbers. And they also have more collaborative kind of, I guess, vision. You have photographers, you have writers, you have folks, artists and activists kind of coming together to write about the state of the world in the 60s and 70s, which is, as we know, quite turbulent. At the same time, kind of 60s, 70s, artists begin to rebel. I think naturally everyone is rebelling in that moment in time. So they are kind of rebelling against the traditional modes of artistic expression like painting and sculpture, and they start looking to new technologies and kind of reconceptualizing their own art into, I guess, books, or using the book format as a venue for artistic expression. They also like to they like the idea of democratizing art. And the idea of a democratic multiple emerges, which is accessible multiple copies of objects, mostly books, that are accessible to a lot of people, as opposed to just one painting or one sculpture that has limited audience. With that, again, 70s, 80s, especially in UK and the US, the punk counterculture kind of hones in on the same democratic multiple, and they begin to sort of channel that punk ethos of do-it-yourself into creating zines for their own communities to connect with each other, to reviews, punk bands, gigs, do-it-yourself culture. They, in the spirit of that particular group, they produce their zines cheaply, quickly. Most of them are handmade. By that moment in time, the Xerox machine is pretty much ubiquitous and accessible to a lot of people, particularly at places of employment. One of the kind of nice things that I appreciate about the zines is when they are made on the clock,
right?
Using the resources of your employer as a way to also critique that relationship of work and creative expression.
I make a nickel while boss makes a dime.
Exactly. So I think this kind of ethos, it continues into the 80s and 90s with, in the US especially, with the Riot Girl, with the rise of the feminist movements, and it's a response of young women and girls within the particular punk scene in response to the sort of heteronormative and very male-centered punk culture. And they start using zines consciously to communicate with each other and to kind of alert other women to other ways of existing within that culture and what is possible, and that they can exist and they can be part of that culture as well.
Sure.
So here we are, 2025. I think the current maybe interest in zines or explosions of zines, particularly in the last 10 years, is I think a response to the online and digital culture, of the kind of sense of not holding anything tangible and not having a tangible connection with another human being that a paper zine that you receive in the mail or you buy at a show can provide. I think we are coming back, or maybe there's a longing to have more of that connection, but also maybe a response to the fact that the online venues like blogs or social media are no longer safe spaces.
Yeah, I think a lot of the resurgence in popularity in zines right now has to do with that, wanting to build a community outside of the technology of big tech companies. Another common thread of zines as being sort of anti-institutional or anti-authoritarian, anti-government, which also begs the question then about zines in academia, which is kind of why we're here. So what is the collection at Tusk? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
So we actually have, let's say, 2.5 collections.
Sure.
So we have a lot of zines that are part of, and this is going to sound completely bonkers and unhinged, but we do have 2 collections that are strictly dedicated to predominantly books or publications about dogs and cats. It's a donor-driven collection dedicated to their beloved pets and endowed by them to continue purchasing materials about dogs and cats. Within that collection, there are actually a lot of what one could consider zine publications. So small, handmade, often Xerox. Some of them have a little bit more higher production value. Materials that are devoted to either cats or dogs. And I have examples of 4 of my favorite zines from that collection.
Here with us today, but will also be linked in the show notes.
Yes. So 3 of them are published by organization, I'm assuming out of Texas, called the American Association of Patriots. And they have 3 volumes. This is from the cat collection: How to Talk to Your Cat About Abstinence, How to Talk About Your Cat About Evolution, and How to Talk to Your Cat About Gun Safety. These are all satirical zines that center your pet, a cat in this case, and how you can have these very important conversations with the animal.
I love these as examples for a lot of reasons. One, I think it's amazing that they're made by a collective, which is also something that's very common in zines. Another thing that is that is rejected by traditional publishing. There is very much a focus on having an individual author. That's fascinating to me, but this idea of zines just being funny, but also educational, but also, I don't know, they can be very small, very much on a single narrow topic, like, I don't know. Who is the audience for these? What are they?
I mean,
where are they
like
from?
these are kind of weird because they are in a way. So they use very conservative sort of, if you want to bound them by politics, very kind of right-wing rhetoric that we often hear in the media, but they are in a way very subversive as well because they are tongue-in-cheek.
But does that always come across? I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a lot there going on. I'll just say that there's definitely a lot. You can interpret them in multiple ways. And my other favorite zine from the dog collection is titled Bad Dogs. It is by a singular author, although we don't know if it's his pseudonym or his real name. And it is images of dogs that are used as warning on various premises that are protected by canine security services. So it's a kind of a global collection of images of how dogs are being used for these warning signs. It has very limited kind of contextual. There is no contextual text. It's just images, and I think it's just a collection of those images for you to marvel at and perhaps recognize in your neighborhood as you're walking by to see a dangerous dog warning on somebody's fence.
Yeah, I think these are such great examples of zines as like pamphlets. Like these would not be monographs, right? These would not be published as books in any way. No one would publish a book that doesn't have any sort of contextualizing information. So by just presenting it as the image itself in a small pamphlet, that's sort of what makes it a zine as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely individual expression and kind of, singular topic, subject, maybe even obsession, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody has noticed something mundane, something that perhaps we don't pay attention to, like these warning signs, and collected them on whatever their walks, travels, and put them together in a little zine pamphlet.
So given that, given this, the radical distribution, the sort of anti-establishment nature of them, how do we, in an academic setting, preserve that ethos? How do we make sure that we're not divorcing the form from not the function, but the spirit behind them?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think when it comes to building collections, I think it's important to respect the wishes of the creators. So for me, it means I mostly acquire zines from the creators themselves. I want to have a face-to-face conversation with them in order to not just to meet them and learn more about why they made these zines, but also to let them know the intentions behind my acquisitions. So this is not a purchase for my private collection. This is actually going to be in a academic library in special collections where people might come in and use this to do research, to be inspired, to maybe teach classes with them. And their name or their zine might become known to more people than the original audience that they might have intended. I also like to work with creators directly because I want them to receive the 100% of the money that they are being paid for the zines, the price that they're asking. I don't necessarily want to deal with the middle person that will take a cut
the distros,
from the creators. So that's kind of one way of acquiring zines, and I hope preserving that kind of ethos that respects the creators' intentions and also pays them for their labor and recognizes that labor. The other way is to acquire zines from kind of individuals who may have been part of subcultures or communities that produced zines, have been a zinester themselves, and over years have collected zines that they have exchanged with others. One of the collections within the Tulane University Special Collections of zines is the Meredith Stern Feminist Zine Collection. Meredith Stern is a Tulane alumni and lived in New Orleans in a kind of a community space where her and her comrades had shows, punk shows, art shows, and she herself produced zines and was influenced by the zines that she would pick up in the process of her travels and meeting people. So her collection is kind of amazing because it gives you a kind of a deep dive into the zine scene of the 90s. So there's some Riot Girls, there's some feminist zines, there's definitely punk zines that address the issues of race and class within the punk scene. There are a lot of do-it-yourself zines from like basic bicycle maintenance to vegan cooking. So food that folks would be eating at shows or in these communal spaces. Her own zines that she created, zines that she acquired living in other cities.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I think zine collections in academia are so fascinating because I think in general, a personal collection can tell a lot about these movements that Meredith Stern was involved in, but also so much about her as a person. I think because zines are so radically distributed, you can tell so much about like a person's movements or who they were interacting with or where they were based off of what zines they have in their collection.
Who they were as a young person growing up. With her collection, what's also really interesting is that there is a large amount of zines that were produced in New Orleans during that period, so pre-Katrina, and because of Katrina, a lot of those zines are actually maybe not by choice but ephemeral, right? They got destroyed, they didn't survive. So the fact that she had that personal collection and left the city, I think before Katrina, with that collection is one way of preserving those materials.
So that brings up another interesting question, which is what is the purpose of an academic institution collecting zines? Is it just this sense of preservation? How are people using the zines in this collection? Is it the same way that they use rare books in the collection? What is this collection illustrate? What can it be used for research purposes? And how are people doing that now?
There's a lot of questions there.
Yes,
so I think the first one, because academic libraries and libraries in general are not neutral, and we exist to collect kind of the widest possible swaths of intellectual creation and knowledge. I think zines are a perfect example of collecting narratives that don't necessarily square with mainstream knowledge creators. So they, by the virtue of existing in libraries, they are able to expand kind of the intellectual horizons of our patrons, right? So in a way, collecting zines it's a very political endeavor. And it's a political commitment to bring those types of materials that might not be, or that might be in sometimes very obvious opposition to the mainstream. So the other side is they wouldn't want to be in an academic setting because it's in a way co-opts the ethos, right? Now you have entered kind of a mainstream academic institution. Your zine is subject to all the kind of academic processes and procedures of being cataloged, of being described, of being categorized. So your identity can be miscategorized. The subject of your zine can be mischaracterized. And then your kind of personal story or the information that you're sharing is available to the public. People who might not share your original sort of sentiments or ideologies will have access to that zine, and they are free to do with it what they will.
Sure. It's sort of the double-edged sword of libraries, right? It democratizes information, but it also makes things available to everyone.
Right.
And part of the ethos of zines is this, like, creating a community around a shared idea. So you are sort of, in a way, not even in a way, you are divorcing the zine from that community that created it and that it was intended for. You've touched on this a little bit of the sort of mediated access, right? That archives are different from libraries in that you can't just walk into an archive and browse the material. So what does that look like for zines in an archival collection?
So they're processed and organized as if they were a archival collection. So they live, rather than live on a shelf like books, they live in boxes and folders. There's generally an inventory of the titles, so they might not have the authors actually attached to them. So they're findable. In our case, they're findable by the title of the zine or keywords, which are artificially assigned by the archivist. So if you're looking for zines about New Orleans, you can type in New Orleans and it will give you all the zines that you would like for New Orleans.
So in that respect, in that, like, people have to sort of consciously and deliberately seek them out, how do people use zines in an academic setting, and for what reason?
So for us, I have used zines in instruction in classes. I have myself taught using zines, and I have worked with faculty to use zines in classes ranging from English 1010 and creative writing to ornithology.
Wow. We have zines about birds.
We do have zines about birds.
Are you primarily using zines as sort of primary examples of the form? Are you teaching about zines, or is it more the content? Is it the history of zines, or is it the creators?
Yes.
Because that's it. Like, zines, you can't really divorce those things, right?
No. So it's a combination of the format, kind of a little bit of the history, where it came from, for the creative write or the English 1010s and writing courses. It's a platform that demonstrates to students how to write informational writing. So a zine on how to cook vegan meal is a type of assignment that they might encounter in their English 1010 class, and they see examples of how that looks when it's executed in a zine format. And then they produce their own. With the environmental studies classes, the zines serve one as sort of inspiration to students. So because their final assignment is a collective class zine, so they get to see the different formats, the different production values of zines, and then they produce their own. In a natural history class, they are used in conjunction with other field guides and manuals, sort of scientific manuals and books, to show that scientific information can be conveyed in different formats. So It just gives them inspiration, but also thinking about how best to convey scientific information, particularly for something like environmental studies or environmental history, where you want to, maybe let people alert them to, climate change. Are you going to do it in a monograph, or will you be more successfully and more powerful if you create a little, pamphlet?
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's so great, making sure that part of the lesson and part of the assignment is that zines are different from traditional publishing, so that there is a specific history and specific ethos behind a zine in particular.
And the interesting thing that some of the classes that I have taught is that students, like, part of the assignment is not only do you create the zine, but you also make multiple copies of the zine.
The democratic multiple.
distribute to your classmates. So there's that kind of community exchange, and everybody gets a copy of each other's zine.
How can people use the collection here at Tulane, but also maybe more broadly, get started in researching the history of zines?
I think the easiest way to get started is to get in touch with your friendly librarian, either a rare book librarian or a art liaison, and they can set you on a path of righteousness in using zines in your instruction. They can definitely let you know what kind of resources there are, and because I think the beauty of many librarians also being zinesters themselves, they understand the nuances of the format and the medium, and they can find whatever it is you need for your class.
Well, you heard it here first. The answer to life, the universe, and everything is contacting a librarian. Well, thank you for being here and chatting with me about zines, one of my favorite subjects, and thank everyone for listening. The zines we talked about today are linked in the show notes below. Go email a librarian.
Slow lanes. Do not lock knowledge in chains. Do not take our rights away. To connect, communicate. No slow lanes. Do not kill our innovation. Do not let money decide our access to information. No slow lanes. No. No slow lanes. No. There is a fight.
Okay, so in this How to Talk to Your Cat About Evolution, one of the captions under a image of a cat staring at what looks to be a dead fish, the photo is captioned "Advice from our experts," PURRTS, and it says scientists claim that evolution is a constant force in the world, and yet you never see a fish with legs or a dog with antlers. You can use a fish purchased at your local grocery store to illustrate this flaw in our enemy's logic.
And I could go on forever about Emily Drabinsky and radical cataloging and ideas,
Right.
which I don't know,
Catalog,
yes,
right.
anyone outside of library science would care very much about, but if anyone listening cares about zine descriptions and making them more radical, Emily
Yeah.
Drabinsky wrote a lot about it.
She has. Damn. I think we'll have to redo it.
Did you redo the whole thing?
Oh my gosh. A lot of the things.